Now we're going to look at some code that actually has a database transaction in it. And in this example, everything is going to work just the way we'd like it to. There are no failures, no errors, and the whole shebang works just fine. What we've got here are the same statements that we had before. We're inserting a student and then capturing the ID of that newly inserted student record. And then we're registering the student for two sections, Section 1 and Section 3, using the new student ID. This is all going to work because there is a Section 1 and there is a Section 3. And so Connie Commit, when we're all said and done, Connie Commit will be added to the database and she'll wind up being registered for the two sections that we want her to be registered to. What's different from the last time without a transaction is we have wrapped this sequence of statements right here. We've wrapped them inside of a transaction. And you start a transaction by simply saying start transaction. That tells MySQL that the following set of statements will all either be applied without any errors, or if anything goes wrong inside the sequence, all of them will be rolled back and there will be no changes to the database. If anything happens partway through here, the database will be returned to the point it looked like when we started the transaction. So that's how we signal to MySQL that we're about to start a transaction. Now there's a couple of setup code up here at the top I want to show you. First of all, I'm declaring two variables. One is just a little integer that I'm setting to false that will be a flag to indicate whether or not an error occurred someplace after the start transaction. And then if an error did occur, we'll want to capture the error message so we can explain to the user what happened and what went wrong. So we just declare these two variables, a character string varchar 255, I picked 255, and this flag here. Now, this code is what's called a handler. This is real important code. This block of code from the beginning to the end of it will be executed only if an error occurs in SQL processing. A SQL exception occurs. So if a statement, this happens to get an error, say just for example this insert statement caused some kind of an error, then what will happen is the statement will be terminated, the insert statement. Then this code will get executed. So we will set the flag to true and we'll capture the error message here. You can go look this up online if you want to understand what's going on here. Suffice it to say that the text of the error will be stored in our variable named error message, the one that we declared up here. And let's say the error occurs on this statement. Unlike in the past when a statement fails without a transaction, the stored procedure would get terminated at that point and we wouldn't go on and execute anything after that. But when you have a transaction in place and something fails, it will go on. It can go on. So let's say this one failed. It would invoke the handler up here, execute those two statements. Then it would go on and try and execute this one. Then we would finally flow down until we got to this if statement down here. So we say if an error occurred, in other words, if this got set to a true in the handler up here because of the exception that occurred, then we will execute a rollback. That means that the data, all the changes that we've proposed up here with these insert statements will be tossed aside and the database will return to the point it was at the moment we executed the start transaction. Then we'll also display our error message here. The student failed to add, and we'll display the error message and a column name results. On the other hand, if everything worked fine, then error occurred will be set to the false value we initialized it to up here. The handler would never execute. And down here, error occurred would be false. We would come down here and commit. Then we would display the message the student was successfully added. What's important to understand is once you start a transaction and you begin to execute statements like these, none of them are actually applied to the database. They're sort of set off to the side as sort of pending transactions until you come down here and either roll them back, in which case all those pending transactions are discarded, or you commit them, in which case essentially what happens is all three of these statements are applied to the final database instantaneously. They all get put in at once. The result being you either get no changes whatsoever or you get all changes. And that's the beauty of a transaction. It's an all or nothing operation. When we wrap these statements here inside of a transaction, we are telling the database manager, I want these to all succeed or to not succeed at all and have nothing changed in the database. So let's go ahead and run this thing. First thing I'm going to do is come over and run the College Create just to make sure I'm running against a nice clean database. Because you don't want to run these over and over again. You'll get errors anyway. So let's go ahead and run this thing and see what we get. Well, first of all, we ran all the way to the end without any errors. Okay. Then here's our result. The student was successfully added. That came from this commit part here in the else clause. Then we dumped out the last two records from the student table, and here was the last student that was already in the database, Kimberly Lopez, but here's Connie commit. We added her successfully. She got assigned ID number 101. Then let's go into the registration table. Here's Connie's two registrations that we did for her, where we registered her for section 1 and 3. So everything worked. And once we got all the way down to the end here, inside the stored procedure, we came down here, no error. We went into the else clause and committed, and then we displayed this select successfully added. So that's an example of treating a block of transactions, a block of statements as a transaction that are either all or nothing. In the final video, I show you this code, except that it's going to fail, and we can take a look at what happens in the database when a transaction fails.